What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, September 16th edition of the Ship My Money Show. Back to talking about Major League Baseball today. 9-game MLB slate, including a game in Coors Field. We had gotten away from there for a while. Haven't talked about it for a bit. Definitely prefer it that way, but it is what it is. We have a Coors game. We have 8 other games on the slate. Doesn't look like we have any weather issues, so we should be good on that front. And as always on this show, going to walk through my player exposures if the slate started right now, how I would be approaching the large field tournament on DraftKings. There is still MLB money to be made, $25K to first in the $15 flagship on DraftKings today, $50K to first in the $111 buy-in, a little bit smaller field there as well. So plenty of money to be made. Obviously, we have Showdown tonight also. Did a show earlier this morning with Neil talking about that game. So if you haven't watched that, and you are interested, that is on the Endgame channel and Neil's channel as well. So check that out. But going to talk baseball on this one. Hopefully make back the money that we lost over the weekend. If you were anything like me, hopefully your Sunday just went better than mine and you're playing with profit. But either way, I'm going to go through position by position and stack by stack. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in chat. Just because I'm not getting to a player or a team certainly doesn't mean that they're a bad play or even that I don't personally like them. It's still, even in 150 lineup set, not that many lineups. You can't play everybody. So I will be glad to give my opinion if you like a play that I'm not getting to. Obviously, as I touch on at the top of the show every time, there are a lot of profitable ways, good ways to approach large field tournaments. Mine certainly isn't the only way. I would just like to think that it is one of the good ways. So if you are getting to the same stuff as me, hopefully that's a good thing, but certainly not the only teams or players that you could be getting to. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. That stuff helps out quite a bit. Trying to grow the channel, especially with NFL season starting, and subscribing to the channel also will give you alerts or turn on notifications. You can get alerts when the shows go live. We do have more shows now, so that is beneficial to you as well, including my Sunday morning NFL show. So do all of that. Also subscribe to Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. If that doesn't make sense for your DFS volume yet, feel free just to sign up for my content using that link. But getting into it now, starting with the pitching, pretty concentrated at pitcher today, very spread out offensively, at least at first glance. I was getting to a lot of different stacks, and usually when that is the case, it means that I am pretty concentrated with arms. And for the most part, getting to the popular ones here, Reed Detmers showing up in 74% of my lineups. He's getting 37% ownership, taking on the White Sox. So it is a very, very good matchup for Detmers. He's also a good pitcher. He was demoted to AAA earlier this season, but it was kind of a weird demotion where he wasn't dominating at the major league level, but he certainly wasn't bad. Certainly wasn't pitching in a way that would get you demoted in most situations. Overall this season, he's struck out 27.2% of hitters, 3.8 xFIP. So good season overall. Walk rate's a little bit higher than you would like at 9.5%, but he's got a matchup against the White Sox, which is extremely good. White Sox active roster against left-handed pitching since the start of last season ranks 13th in strikeout percentage. They have a 74 WRC+, which is just absurdly bad. You can't really do worse than that in that big of a sample size. It is a pretty crazy number to look at. So obviously a very, very good matchup for Detmers. I think the ownership is warranted. And then the other thing is that he's only $7,700. A pitcher with his strikeout stuff and his overall talent level, taking on the White Sox should just be more popular than this. So he's going to let you get to whatever bats you want. He's going to open up, more expensive stacks and all of that. So getting to Detmers overall just looks really, really good for me. Shota Imanaga, another one, 66% of my lineups, 26% for the field at $9,300. Good strikeout matchup for him, taking on the A's in Chicago. Wind blowing in a little bit, nothing too crazy. It's not, a full-on Wrigley wind game or anything like that. But Imanaga is a very good pitcher, striking out 24.5% to 25% of the hitters that he has faced this year, 3.73 xFIP. He has had some power issues, allowing about 1.5 home runs per 9 innings. That is a little bit concerning when you are talking about a team like Oakland that does strike out a lot, but does also hit home runs. But still plenty of upside here for Imanaga. 173 expected ISO allowed to right-handed hitters this year. I do think that Oakland is a viable stack in large field tournaments, given their power upside and the negative correlation against Imanaga. But that doesn't mean that I don't also want a pretty big share of Imanaga lineups, given the strikeout upside that he has. The strikeout matchup here against Oakland is a little bit worse than usual also. Jacob Wilson is once again leading off at shortstop. This is somebody that is very, very difficult to strike out. So you do still have lineup or strikeouts rather throughout the A's lineup overall, but that is something I think to call attention to, where the guy that's going to get the most plate appearances for the A's is actually really difficult to strike out. So a slight downgrade from a strikeout standpoint, but still kind of nitpicking there. And Imanaga still looks good to me. Paul Skeens, 33% of my lineups, 20% for the field, taking on the Cardinals. Not a great strikeout matchup for him. And you do have, whatever pitch count concerns or innings concerns. For him, the Pirates have been limiting him a bit, but the strikeout upside is still there. He hasn't been drastically limited. Went 6 innings last start. He hadn't done that in his previous 2, but went 6 innings through 98 pitches. I don't think he's very likely to go above 100, but for the most part, we haven't seen him too limited. He had 2 starts where he threw 82 and 87 pitches 3 and 4 starts ago, but still, got through 5 and 6 innings in those starts. So I'd be surprised, really, regardless of how efficient he is, for the most part, if he goes more than 6. But so far, with the way that they've been treating him, I think you can still get to him in DFS. 9,800 for his strikeout upside on this slate is pretty appealing. It's not necessarily the best matchup against the Cardinals. They rank 17th in WRC plus against right-handed pitching this season. They rank 26th in strikeout percentage at 19.7% on their active roster. So not the best matchup, but Skeen striking out 32.3% of hitters, 2.69 xFIP this year. Happy to get to him a bit more than the field. Sean Manaea showing up about half as often as the field. So he is my fourth most used pitcher. Can you hear me now? Should be good now. My mic had briefly come unplugged and it muted me. So going back to what I was saying about Manaea, I'm getting to him as my fourth most used pitcher, but not getting as much as the field. Field's at about 33%. I am at 17 to 18. 8,500 is a reasonable price tag. The Nats are a tough strikeout matchup. 27th in K percentage against left-handed pitching on their active roster since the start of last season. A lot of young talent on this team. You have James Wood up from the minors. You have Dylan Cruz up from the minors. So the team is getting or has gotten more talented as the season has gone on. Manaea has made some adjustments, though. Strikeouts have been up for him lately, and that seems to just be something that is real. I mean, every additional start that he goes out there and racks up strikeouts makes me think that he might be coming in a little bit underprojected. But either way, I'm not getting quite as much of him as the field. Still looks like a perfectly fine option, though. If I were to walk back some Imanaga or Detmers, I assume Manaea would be the next guy popping up for me. And if that happens, it's not the end of the world. I would be perfectly fine with it. But I do prefer Detmers at the cheaper price tag. I do like Imanaga a little bit more as well. Aaron Savali not showing up too much for the field, not showing up too much for me. Tough matchup for him against Philadelphia. The argument in his favor is that he is only $6,600. He is a pretty decent pitcher overall, but not a priority for me on this slate. Striking out about 22% of hitters this year, 4.3 xFIP. I'm not getting to as much Merrill Kelly or Seth Lugo as the field. They're both projected for 10 to 15% ownership. Kelly in a favorable matchup against the Rockies, but in Coors Field, he is very fairly priced at 6,800 as well to face a team that is as bad as Colorado. So I don't fault anyone for going there for value. But again, if I can find $900 and get to Detmers, I do prefer doing that against the White Sox in not Coors Field. And then Seth Lugo, 8,700, good matchup against the Tigers. He is in Kansas City, which is a difficult park for getting strikeouts. But mostly, I think for me, it's just the range of outcomes thing with Lugo. He, will have the occasional game. I think he did recently where he does get a lot of strikeouts, but generally he's not a great strikeout pitcher. He's somebody that when you roster him in DFS, you're hoping he goes relatively deep into the game, doesn't give up runs, and all of that's fine. He's, I think, a good play. I just tend to chase strikeouts a little bit more than I chase, good matchups which this is against the Tigers. So I think Lugo's fine. I think Kelly's fine. They just happen to be guys that I'm not getting as much of right now. Checking to see if there's any other popular pitchers that I'm not getting to. Yamamoto getting 8% ownership. I don't have him right now, but he's not overly popular anyway. So pretty much getting to the popular arms here, which again doesn't surprise me too much, given that I do know I am very spread out with my stacks. It's going to be a case where hitter ownership, for the most part, just isn't going to be very high in most stacks, and that's going to just allow me to get to the pitchers that I projected the best. So I'm happy with the way that works out. And also, back to the Lugo point, you can see here, if you disagree with the way I have him projected, if you're just higher on him than me, then he would pretty quickly show up more. But for me, I have him projected for 16.5 DraftKings points. That is like 3 fewer points than Detmers, who's less expensive. It's 2.5 to 3 points fewer than Anaya in the same price range. It's 4.5 points less than Imanaga. So you can see based on the projection why I'm not getting as much Lugo. It's just that I have these guys at the top projected so much better than him. But, again, that is an input where, that's the thing to keep in mind when you're talking about sims or optimizers or whatever tools you're using. All these are tools that use the inputs you give them to do what you tell them to do. So for me, if I'm telling them that Lugo is a step behind all of these guys and that he's also going to be relatively popular, it's going to tell me I shouldn't play that much of him. If you think that Lugo is closer to those guys, then you should be playing more. So you can pretty clearly see from an input standpoint why Lugo is showing up that way for me, even though he does have the good matchup and he is a good pitcher. Looking at the overall stacks I'm getting to, very, very flat. Like I said, Arizona at the top, along with the Angels, the White Sox, the Rockies. So it looks like a pretty ugly slate as far as stacks go for me. Arizona, clearly the team that you want to get to a lot. A near 7 implied run total here, going up against Senzatella in his return in Coors Field. They look really, really, really good, but they are also going to get a lot of ownership on this slate. The Angels, the Angels actually have a nice implied run total here between 4.5 and 5. The White Sox are a negative correlation stack against Detmers. Obviously I'm getting to a lot of Detmers, but in non-Detmers lineups, they do make some sense. He has allowed 1.3 home runs per 9 this year. The White Sox typically aren't going to be popular. So they do have a pretty clear path to putting you at the top of large field tournaments. It's just not going to happen all that often because they are unbelievably bad. The Rockies get some negative correlation going up against Merrill Kelly. They are in Coors Field. They're going to be the lower owned side of that game. So all of that is appealing. But again, they suck. Cubs look fine. Kansas City looks fine. Looking at 5-mans, and this gets to the question that Jason Gordon just asked. He said, so how do you get different if you play Arizona 5-mans? I don't have a lot of Arizona 5-mans for one. And I think part of that is probably that it's difficult to get different. The immediate answer is that you go to lower owned pitching, which you could see, a minute ago that I am not really doing on this slate. You go to lower owned pitching, you go to lower owned secondary stacks, but that is a big problem. And it's why I think that generally, it's one of the reasons why generally I get away from popular stacks quicker than I get away from popular pitchers, because when you allocate 5 out of 10 roster spots to guys that are popular, it just becomes that much more difficult to differentiate. Whereas even with a popular pitcher or 2 popular pitchers, you still have 80% of your lineup spots to use low owned guys. So even though Arizona is my most used stack overall, I'm using them a lot more as 2-mans, 3-mans than 4-mans or 5-mans. So I'm getting to the lower owned, lower probability stacks, and then essentially saying, if this stack does well, they're low owned. At this point, I want to be mixing in the best projected plays, which is Arizona. Jason said, so will that already make you kind of different if you do play 5-man Arizona? I'm not sure what you're referring to there. But yeah, I don't have a lot of 5-man Arizona. Obviously, those lineups are going to project really, really well, but it just becomes an ownership issue, especially in larger field tournaments. So I am getting to the White Sox. I'm getting to the Rockies. I'm getting to the Tigers. This all looks and feels absolutely disgusting. But for the most part, offenses on this slate are pretty flat with the exception of Arizona. So it does kind of push up teams that are facing relatively popular pitchers. The White Sox facing Detmers, who's popular. The Rockies facing a 10 to 15% owned Kelly. Tigers facing a 10 to 15% owned Lugo. I obviously don't love any of these offenses. I don't have, a ton to say as far as them being likely to succeed. It's just when they do succeed, you're in a really good spot because you have a pretty inexpensive stack. So you have really good players around it. You have a low owned stack as far as individual player ownership goes. So you're not competing with that many lineups that have them. And then you're also knocking off a sizable percentage of the field that has the opposing pitcher. So all of that looks good. And then also for the Tigers, keep in mind this is a nice park upgrade for them in Kauffman Stadium. It's not a great park for hitting home runs, but it is a very good park for offense in general. So that's nice. It does make them probably a little bit underpriced since they are priced generally to be playing in Comerica Park. Similarly for the Rockies, obviously this isn't a park upgrade. They play their home games here, but they are a team in Coors Field. They are very, very bad, but they are still in Coors Field. So that is a benefit. For the White Sox, yeah, it's a good park. It's a good offensive park in Anaheim, but they are so unbelievably bad. But I understand why I'm getting to them. Getting to some Philly, which is an offense that obviously actually feels good. They're in American Values Field or whatever the hell Miller Park is called. I blank on that every single time. It's something along those lines. It's still a good park for offense, and the Phillies obviously have a lot of power. They're going up against Aaron Savali, who isn't a bad pitcher, but he's not a pitcher that I'm shying away from either, especially on a slate where I do think you're going to probably see pretty modest ownership coming into the Phillies since they have a 4.5 implied run total, and people are going to be gravitating towards Arizona. Savali this year, actually striking lefties out at a higher clip than righties, 26% to 17.5, 155 expected ISO to lefties, 164 to righties. So again, just overall a pretty solid pitcher, but the Phillies are obviously a very good lineup. Schwarber, Turner, Harper, Castellanos, Alec Baum, Bryson Stott, JT Realmuto, 1 through 7, very deep lineup that you can get to. You do also have a 2K Stevenson hitting ninth if you need to go there, but probably not what I'm going to be prioritizing from a absolutely loaded Philadelphia lineup. Kansas City on the other side of the Tigers matchup, facing off against Reese Olson. Not a bad pitcher, but Kansas City does have a relatively high implied run total on this slate. The park is good for offense, like I was saying. Olson has been very, very good at limiting power this year. 134 expected ISO to righties, sub 100 to lefties, but Kansas City has upside. You have Bobby Witt, which can drive your stacks. You have Salvador Perez, which drives your stacks as a good catching option. They're hitting 2 and 3. Other than that, pretty valuable offense. Tommy Pham, sub 4K leading off. Massey, 4,400 batting cleanup. MJ Melendez is free batting 5th at 3K. So they're affordable. You can get good teams around them. Then there's a bit of a drop-off and just kind of mixing and matching the rest of these teams. Pittsburgh, Mets, Houston, St. Louis. Like I said, most of these teams look very, very similar. I am a little surprised I'm not getting more Oakland than I am, just given that they do have a lot of power upside. I mean, if I'm going to play the White Sox, I'm going to play the Tigers, I'm going to play the Rockies. I would have no issue playing Oakland. They have the probably best set of hitters of any of those teams, certainly better than the White Sox or the Rockies. But for whatever reason, I'm not really getting to them in this lineup set. But if you wanted to play them in place of one of those other teams at the top, they're serving the same purpose against a pretty popular Imanaga. Stephen Leibowitz said, are you getting any cannon on the basis of a 5K guy who is stretched out as too cheap? I'm not, but I think that is very true. Also, he does have a good matchup against the Angels as far as the Angels just being a strikeout heavy offense, top 10 in K percentage against right-handed pitching, 91 WRC plus. When Cannon is on, he doesn't get a ton of strikeouts, but he can keep the ball on the ground. He is better against right-handed hitters, as you would expect. Only a 123 expected ISO allowed to righties this year, 198 to lefties. We do not have an Angels lineup yet. It'll probably be pretty balanced. Shanuel, Moniak, Cavadas likely to be your left-handed bats. Other than that, actually, the projected lineup I'm looking at is all righties. So that would also be a benefit overall for Jonathan Cannon. I'm not getting to him right now, but I do think that, for example, the question of how do you differentiate in a 5-man Arizona stack, you probably play less Reed Detmers and more Jonathan Cannon, for example, to offset some of that ownership. I do also know that I was playing around with some stuff for the $100 tournament earlier, and in a limited number of lineups, I had Jonathan Cannon in one. So I certainly don't think he's unplayable or anything like that. I just don't have him in these lineups. I went the route of differentiating at hitter and didn't really need to at pitcher. Like if I'm stacking the White Sox or the Rockies or the Tigers, I don't want Jonathan Cannon really in those lineups because I have the salary to just get pitchers that project a lot better. If the Rockies or the White Sox happen to score a lot of runs, I don't then want to be in a position where it's like, okay, good. I got that big White Sox game for, the second time all season. Now I just need Jonathan Cannon to have a career best game as well. At that point, I want whatever the best hitters and pitchers are around that White Sox stack. So there's, it really depends how you're approaching the slate. The more Arizona I'm playing, the more I'm probably playing Jonathan Cannon. Jack said, just curious, how many lineups do you play on a smaller contest day like this? I play my normal stuff. Today, I've been playing in general more small field stuff. Today, I'll mostly be focusing on playing, limited lineups in that $100 50K to first. But yeah, it doesn't change anything as far as what I play day to day for the most part. Moving over to individual players, again, I expect these to look pretty spread out because of the stacks that I'm getting to. But at catcher, highest owned guy for me, Hunter Goodman coming in at 13%, Logan O'Hoppe coming in at 11. I do like O'Hoppe a bit. So does the field. Projected ownership is in line with where I'm getting to. O'Hoppe's affordable. He has some power. He's in a good park. He is facing a pitcher in Cannon that is better against righties, but certainly not a great pitcher overall. So just getting to O'Hoppe here makes sense. Hunter Goodman, if he's in the lineup, we do not, at least as of the time that I ran these, we did not have a Colorado lineup. He is batting seventh, though. He's 3,200. So getting to him at catcher makes sense. Probably am going to end up being over the field on him because I have 13% at catcher. You can also play him in the outfield. Certainly prefer playing him at catcher just because the opportunity cost is lower. It's a lot easier to find good hitting outfielders than good hitting catchers. But Goodman looks good. Corey Lee, 2% ownership, showing up 9% of the time for me. Negative correlation against Reed Detmers. If I'm stacking the White Sox, I may as well be getting the Corey Lee. Use a catcher because the opportunity cost is low. Give me the best one-offs and secondary stacks around the White Sox that I can possibly get. And you can do that, by using catcher, second base, etc. from the stack. The weaker positions that don't have as many one-off options. Salvador Perez, 8% for me at catcher. You can also play him at first base. He's going to look better at catcher, but nothing wrong with playing him at first base either. And then pretty flat here. Nothing really standing out other than Gabby Moreno is getting 23% projected ownership. I only have 7% right now. And this just goes back to the approach that I am taking to the slate, the approach that I generally take in MLB, where I end up prioritizing lower owned bats. That's going to cost me somebody like Moreno. He's very obviously the best catching play from a projection standpoint. Everybody is going to be very well aware of that. And I'm just kind of hoping that variance happens because there's a lot of it in baseball. But clearly, if you're playing cash games, you should be playing Moreno. If you have a lineup where you played like Jonathan Cannon and I don't know, some other sub 10% owned pitcher and you're stacking the Angels or the Diamondbacks, by all means, play Gabby Moreno. He looks really, really good. But it's baseball, and hopefully the Diamondbacks just don't score a million runs tonight. This is Senzatello's first start of the season. Typically, he's been an okay pitcher. Don't know what to expect from him, obviously, in his first start of the year. He barely pitched last year either because of injury. Going back to 2022, he did hold lefties to a 135 expected ISO. Righties had a 172 expected ISO. He doesn't strike guys out. He just relies on weak contact, ground balls. It's a very dangerous way to pitch in Coors Field where batted balls become hits at a higher frequency than other parks. But he has been okay at it. He's not a total gas can, but the Rockies bullpen behind him will give it up. Senzatella, decent chance that he is rusty in his first major league start in basically 2 years. So very, very high upside spot for the Diamondbacks. But I can at least tell myself that they're facing an okay pitcher, which makes me feel not a whole lot better, but a little bit better about not getting to the D-backs. At first base, Pavin Smith showing up a ton, or for the field, 22%. He's not in my lineups. I did have him projected in, I think. So kind of surprised by that. Maybe I'm getting to him a little bit in the outfield. Not somebody that I want zero of. That's why I don't know if I just had some sort of issue with my projected lineup when I ran this, but I don't feel good about zero Pavin Smith. That kind of feels like a mistake. But, getting less than 22% doesn't really surprise me. Getting to 14% Christian Walker looks pretty good. That's actually pretty much in line with the field. He is expensive at 5,900, so that will pull his ownership down a little bit, and it is just going to make him a little bit easier to get to if you have the salary. $7,700 Detmers does help me get to him quite a bit. Nico Cavada is getting 11% ownership. I'm at 9%. I'm getting to Andrew Vaughn, basically 2x the field. I like that against Detmers. Like I said, he has given up some power this year. Andrew Vaughn is one of the few bats on the White Sox that has power. Detmers has given up more to lefties, though. 201 expected ISO to left-handed hitters, only 127 to righties. But again, if you're going to take the step to stack the White Sox against a popular Detmers, you probably should be playing guys like Andrew Vaughn because there's not that many remotely competent hitters in that lineup. Vaughn is one of them. Cavadas, Pete Alonso, Bryce Harper. Harper in that matchup against Savali. Pete Alonso at 4,900 looks perfectly fine. Obviously, a lot of power upside for him there. Taking on Jake Irvin, who has been pretty solid this year. 150 expected ISO allowed to righties. Don't love that matchup. But like I was saying before, this is a weird slate where there's not a ton of great matchups for offenses. There's not a ton of great hitters parks, and there's really not a lot of good hitters parks and good matchups. So that's why you're seeing so much ownership come into Arizona. But it's also why you're seeing me pretty flat on my exposures elsewhere. It's not that I love Pete Alonso against Jake Irvin. It's just that I don't really love most hitters on this slate that aren't getting a ton of ownership. And Alonso does just give you 2 home run upside, which is nice. Neil said 85 watching, 16 likes. Yeah, hit the like button. That does help out a lot for the channel. So definitely appreciate that. Goldschmidt going up against Paul Skeens. Again, he's 2% owned. I don't like taking hitters against Paul Skeens, but nobody else does either. And hopefully, Paul Goldschmidt just has a good day. He's still a good hitter. This slate for me is very, very much about just taking advantage of variance, hoping that it plays out in a weird way and that the field just gravitates too much to the best projected plays in Arizona or in Colorado with Arizona. So very much just kind of hoping that weird shit happens on this slate. And when you're doing that, I think best way to approach it is getting to talent. Like you want to still consider range of outcomes. It's one thing to say, well, this hitter's 2% owned, then maybe he'll have a good game. But if you're talking about a guy that has like a 100 ISO and doesn't steal bases, his version of a good game still isn't really doing anything to win you tournaments because it's probably like 3 singles and a couple runs scored and basically a home run worth of fantasy points for the entire game. Somebody like Pete Alonso, somebody like Paul Goldschmidt, when they're low owned, even if it's a bad matchup, at least when they do well, their version of a good game is 28, 30 DraftKings points, something that can put you right at the top of tournaments, by themselves. So when you are approaching a slate, you do have a weird slate like this where there's not a lot of spots that stand out other than 1 or 2 very obvious ones. Just going after the most talented players at low ownership is the approach that I like to take, just because they are still going to have bigger standard deviations, more variance, more volatility in their performance. And that's how you win tournaments is, taking advantage of that volatility. But to do that, you need to find guys that are low owned and actually have that ability. Pete Alonso, Andrew Vaughn, Bryce Harper, Paul Goldschmidt, obviously all fit that description. At second base, I would assume Ketel Marte is getting an absurd amount of ownership. He is getting 17%. I don't really have him. He's 6,600. I'd love to get there if I can. He is very, 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 very good. Probably one of the most underrated hitters in baseball this season. Having an absolutely fantastic year. He can run a bit as well, but very expensive and popular. And he's a hitter, so obviously still more likely to fail than not. So I'm not getting to him, but again, that is a very good play. Probably somebody you're trying to get into your lineups and cash games. And if you're differentiating elsewhere, like a pitcher, you should be getting to him as well. Brandon Drury getting a lot of ownership also. That lineup, like I said, hasn't come out yet, but that's one that I'm not as afraid of not getting to. He's getting a lot of ownership because he is sub 3K. He's projected to bat cleanup, but he doesn't have a ton of power. He's not having a very good year overall. He is facing a pitcher in Cannon that has been able to limit right-handed power this year. So he's somebody that is getting ownership just because of his median point per dollar projection. And those are the types of guys that are the easiest, I think, to get away from when they're popular. Because from a range of outcome standpoint, I can find plenty of guys that have the same upside as Brandon Drury. I can't find that many guys, especially at second base, that have the same upside as Ketel Marte, but you are paying for Marte, and you do also have to take on that ownership cost in addition to the salary when you go there. So that's why I'm not getting there, but it's just a lot scarier play to get away from. Brandon Drury is kind of, if he happens to have the game where he doubles, homers, and steals a base, I'm in trouble, but those don't happen all that often. Nick York, 2K second baseman for the Pirates, showing up a lot for me. He's projected for 8% ownership. I'm getting to 24%. I think this is pretty much just a positional punt where the field is going to be paying up for Ketel Marte a lot, or they're going to be paying down for Brandon Drury. And I can just grab this guy making his major league debut and hope that he does better than Brandon Drury. He stole 7 bases at AAA this year. He hit 2 home runs, stole 13 bases at AAA between Boston and Pittsburgh. He hit 8 combined home runs at AAA in 78 games. He projects to be a below average hitter, but he at least has a little bit of stolen base upside in there. Mostly, though, it is just from a roster construction standpoint, there's not a lot to like at second base. And so that's why you see nearly 40 to 50% projected ownership coming into two guys, Marte and Drury, where the field is either paying up for the clear best guy in Ketel Marte, or they're all gravitating to the best projected value play. The roster construction, I think, is correct, where if I'm not paying for Marte, this isn't a position that I want to allocate a ton of salary. I want to be paying up at other spots, but I would just rather take the guy getting one half to 1/3 of Brandon Drury's ownership and just hope that he beats him today, because that's going to happen a pretty frequent percentage of the time. Colt Keith showing up 10% for me, fields at about 5%, $3,300, has power upside. Not a good matchup against Lugo, but one of the better left-handed hitting options on the Tigers, getting the park upgrade. So I am happy with that at low ownership. You're still saving some money there. Lugo, again, a good pitcher. He has also allowed less power to lefties this year. 127 expected ISO in that split, 181 to righties. It does make sense given his good curveball and his curveball usage. But Colt Keith, again, just one of the better, higher upside hitting options on the Tigers. So again, just kind of hoping that you get a good Colt Keith game, even though it isn't a good matchup. Sosa is cheap, getting to him a bit, getting to some Zach Geloff more than the field, batting fifth, going up against Imanaga, obviously doing that in non-Imanaga lineups. But Geloff does have some power. He does have stolen base upside. So he is the type of cheap guy that does have volatility in there. And at low ownership, I like getting to those. But from a roster construction standpoint, it does very much look like you either want to be paying up for Ketel Marte or saving some money. For the field, that means Brandon Drury. For me, it apparently means Nick York, Colt Keith, Lennon Sosa, Zach Geloff. None of these guys are appealing outside of Marte, but I will take the lower owned ones and just hope that Drury, doesn't have a big game. Drury may not even end up being in the lineup. We'll see. At third base, I am pretty flat here, and also mostly paying up, except for Brian Ramos here, getting in 12% of my lineups at 2,500 for the White Sox. So another value play from the White Sox. He isn't somebody that obviously I have any confidence in, but he is projected to hit fifth. He's cheap. Third base isn't the strongest position in the world. So if you're not playing the White Sox, you're probably not playing Brian Ramos. He's not somebody that I would really want to be using all that often as a one-off. But within your stacks, if he is batting fifth, perfectly fine getting to him. 22-year-old. He has played 22 games with the White Sox this year, 2 home runs, no stolen bases, 6 stolen bases at AAA, 2 at AA this season. Projects to be a well below average hitter, so he will fit in perfectly with the White Sox, but he's cheap. And the idea being you don't want him as a one-off really, because he's not a home run hitter. He's not a big stolen base threat. He doesn't give you that volatility that you're looking for, particularly in one-offs. But within your stacks, if you have a lineup that has 5 White Sox in it, the obvious assumption for that stack is the White Sox do well. And if you know ahead of time the White Sox do well, then Brian Ramos obviously does project better at 2,500 than he does, from a pure median standpoint. So you may as well correlate with the rest of the lineup, take advantage of that value. But if you have a lineup that isn't stacking the White Sox, you don't want to be grabbing a lot of just, I'm going to play Brian Ramos here, because you really want to be using those non-stacked players to maximize the upside of your lineup, independent of what your stack does. And Brian Ramos doesn't really do that. So I would expect that he is primarily in White Sox stacks for me. Probably should have checked this before I went on that whole spiel. But yeah, 93% of my lineups that have Brian Ramos have at least one other White Sox in them, and that is what I would want to see. Isaac Paredes, 9% projected ownership. I'm getting to 11%. He's got some power upside. He's batting fifth. He's affordable. All that looks fine. Going up against Joey Estes, who has allowed a 184 expected ISO to right-handed hitters this year as well. Manny Machado showing up about 10% for me, so a little bit over the field there. San Diego has been a good park for right-handed power this year for whatever reason. Spencer Arrighetti, 169 expected ISO, 25% K percentage to righties. He is having a solid year overall, solid rookie season overall. But Manny Machado, again, just a really, really talented hitter at sub 10% ownership. The upside for him, when Manny Machado does well, it looks good. When Nolan Arenado does well, it looks good. And also keep in mind that, I am spreading out my exposures here. This isn't me allocating a ton of money to Manny Machado or Nolan Arenado, assuming these guys fail, which they're going to do more often than not, period, but especially in their respective matchups, I still am going to have a lot of other ways to win. Basically, you're just kind of betting on the field versus the Diamondbacks. And the Diamondbacks are still going to win a pretty good chunk of the time, but you're going to get paid off better when they don't, and when you're on one of these other offenses that does. Suarez getting 17% ownership. I'm around half the field there at 5,300. A little bit over the field on Alex Bregman, a little bit over on Alec Baum. Again, it's just, the amount of ownership going into the Diamondbacks, and then also in this case again right now to Brandon Drury, just makes it so you can get over the field on a lot of really good players. I don't need to put all my eggs in one basket, but I can just kind of spread it out and diversify across a lot of really, really good low-owned options at third base. At shortstop, getting to a lot of Bobby Witt Jr., 2x the field there. By not paying for the Diamondbacks, it does open up the salary for me to get to him at 6,500. Again, the matchup against Reese Olson isn't great. Olson has been very good at limiting power this year, but Bobby Witt Jr., one of the only options for MVP in the American League. Not going to win it, but obviously on the short list, and just not getting a lot of ownership on this slate. Very, very good. Reese Olson has been above average at preventing stolen bases in addition to limiting power. So again, matchup sucks, but Bobby Witt Jr. is fantastic. He also is very, very good at home. This park fits his skill set very, very well. Dansby Swanson, pretty much even with the field on him. He's batting second. He's cheap. He's got power upside. He's got stolen base upside. So I am getting to him. I'm getting to Jacob Wilson as a value play. This is just another very good example of what I was talking about with Brandon Drury's ownership, where Jacob Wilson's not a big-time power hitter or anything like that, but he is leading off. He is in the same price range as Drury, and he's getting 1/3 to 1/4 the ownership. So I'll just take him. I'll take guys like him and hope that Brandon Drury just, goes 0 for or goes 1 for 4 with a single, and some combination of these other guys that I'm playing beats him out. Zach Neto, even with the field. Again, not the best matchup against Cannon because Cannon has been solid against righties, but it is a good park. Zach Neto is a solid enough hitter. He's fairly priced. I think the field's pretty much got it right there. I think the field's pretty much got it correct on Kiner Falefa leading off at 3,900 for the Pirates. Pretty decent value play there at shortstop in St. Louis. So not a great park for power, but not a great matchup for power either. Andre Payante on the mound for the Cards. Only a 120 expected ISO to righties. But it's just a decent value overall since he is leading off. There's also not a ton to like at shortstop today, even though this is overall a position that has really, really good players. It's not so much on this slate. Francisco Lindor is not in the lineup for the Mets. Gunnar Henderson's not on the slate. Ellie De La Cruz is not on the slate. So it does make the position just a little bit weaker. And it is kind of a weird position where you have some of the best players in baseball at the position, and then you don't have a really strong mid-range. It's like you're either one of the best players in baseball or you're probably not a very good hitter. So taking on some salary when you're not playing Bobby Witt or Tovar basically does make a lot of sense. Tovar showing up 9% for me. That's even with the field. Even with the field on Trey Turner, even with the field on Adames. That group obviously does give you a lot of upside. Tovar in Colorado, Turner and Adames both just very good. As far as the field goes, Swanson, Neto leading the way. Perdomo, 12%, 11 to 12% ownership. He's the one that I'm not really getting to as far as the popular guys go. And the reason for that is just that I'm not really getting to his teammates too much. And so I'm not going to get to a ton of him either. He is also batting 9th at 4,500. So I would certainly prefer to have him in stacks when I'm playing him. And since I'm not really stacking them all that much, probably it's not going to get to him too often. Before I move to the outfield, Arcathelza said White Sox activated Moncada, but he's not starting. I did see they had activated him. I had not seen their starting lineup yet. So that's good to know. I assume he's terrible at this point anyway. But we did get the White Sox starting lineup. They only have 2 lefties in there. Zach DeLoach leading off at 2,400. Andrew Benintendi hitting third at 3,200. I do highlight them just because it's not going to feel good clicking their names. It's not going to feel good clicking anybody's name on the White Sox. Detmers does have pretty drastic reverse splits, and they are explainable. He's very, very good at burying his slider back foot to right-handed hitters. So it looks like a fastball coming in. It basically hits the dirt, and they swing over the top of it. He doesn't locate or throw it as well, have as much success with it against left-handed hitters. So we have seen reverse splits from him. Strikeout percentage is actually higher against lefties, but he gives up more power. 201 expected ISO with a 29% strikeout percentage. So I'm not saying that they are great plays or anything like that. I am saying if you are stacking the White Sox, if you're going the same route I'm going, you probably should be mixing in the lefties along with the right-handed power bats that you want to get to. Nicholas Barrett said, is there any confirmed data that supports road teams don't perform well in their first game in Colorado, or is that BS? I think it's true. I haven't looked into it too much. The way I'm pretty sure it's true, but it still doesn't do a whole lot from a DFS standpoint, I don't think, because like take this slate for example, right, where the Diamondbacks have an implied run total north of 6, and pretty much every other team is below 5, and you have just this really high upside matchup in Coors for Arizona. Even if you do dock them a little bit, you say for whatever reason Vegas still isn't factoring this in, projections still aren't factoring this in, and you cut back Arizona projections by a hair, it's going to tell you that they are overowned or a little bit more overowned than they already were. They're still going to project as the best plays on the slate. So I do think that there is truth to that. I'm not positive. Again, I haven't spent really any time digging into that. I do think that I've been told enough by like reputable people that there is something to it, but it's not enough that it's going to drive my DFS decisions other than in this case where like I'm not playing a lot of Arizona. I can look at that and like try and comfort myself while I wait for this game to start and all my money to disappear. But other than that, I don't think it makes a huge difference for DFS. And like TTID forever said, sample size needs to be really big before you can buy into that, which it does. And obviously, there's a lot of moving parts, what teams, matchups, all of that. So even if there is some truth to it, I don't think it's moving the needle for me in DFS. Looking at the outfield, where I am still not getting the Pavin Smith. So I do really dislike this in general. Like he's 3,500. He's batting 5th. He's just a really good value play. But I guess the argument or the reason that I'm not really getting to him is that he's only first base and outfield eligible. So the opportunity cost at the positions that you would roster him is really high. And I can find plenty of other very, very good players to get to. But it scares me a lot that I just am not getting to the number 5 hitter that is priced like he's playing anywhere but Coors Field. Corbin Carroll getting 20% ownership. I'm at 17% there. So I do like that I am getting to Corbin Carroll a lot. I like that I'm getting to Christian Walker a lot. I am getting to the just really, really good Diamondbacks, really high upside, volatile Diamondbacks players. I'm not getting as much to the guys that are good plays because they're in Coors Field, but then otherwise you would typically not be paying a lot of attention to. I do like that aspect of it. I'm not really getting to Peterson much. I'm not getting too much McCarthy. At the top, I am getting to Luis Robert, about 2x the field. Fernando Tatis, a little over the field. So very spread out again in the outfield, which is a little bit surprising to me. I thought that I would probably be prioritizing, some good hitters a little bit more than I am. But Suzuki gives me some upside. Tommy Pham leading off against Olsen. If Moniak's in the lineup, that does look like a very good matchup for him against Jonathan Cannon. He, along with Brandon Drury, may or may not be in the lineup tonight, but I do like Moniak a lot if he's in there. One of the few left-handed bats that they have, only 3,300. And like I said, Cannon doesn't really strike anybody out, but strikes lefties out less and gives up a lot more power, a lot more hard contact to them. Jordan Beck is maybe. He's batting 9th. He's 3,200. I'm getting to him about 2x the field. Not going too crazy, but he is a cheap play. He is in Coors Field. He's just not on the team that everybody else is going to. Over the field on Castellanos, over on Brian Reynolds, Brandon Nimmo, all of these guys, obviously just talented guys that have power upside, some stolen base upside in there as well. 2x the field on Benintendi. Like I said, not avoiding the lefty-lefty matchup. Ian Happ around the field. Riley Green, Yordan Alvarez, just talented players that aren't getting ownership. So nothing super interesting there as far as ownership goes. There's not one or two player stands that I'm really taking. It is more still just grabbing a lot of talented players at low ownership and hoping that some of them come through and beat out the popular guys. So that's pretty much how I'm approaching this slate. I think it's a very, very interesting tournament slate. It's one of the ones, I've said this a lot on shows in the past, but I think that slates like this are really fun to play for tournaments. They're very difficult to do good content for because basically you just get what I did, where it's like, oh, well, yeah, this guy at 2% owned looks fine. I'll play 10% of him and 10% of this other guy. From a content standpoint, slates where I have one or two teams that I'm really getting a lot of, and I can tell you why I like them and all of that, it makes for better content. But I think less fun to play. Whereas here you have one team in Arizona that is clearly the number one stack on the slate, number one team, ownership aside. Everybody's well aware of that. And my approach is just, yeah, they're clearly number one, but there's like 8 other teams that are tied for number 2. So I'll just play all 8 of those other teams and not play the one team that everybody is going to. Chunk to Do said, you getting any of this Wagaman character? I don't know who that is. Do I like the Cubs or Royals in single entry? I think either are fine. Basically, I think you can just play like anybody other than Arizona. I mean, you could play Arizona in single entry, just make sure that you're using low owned players around them. Also, it depends on the field size. If you're talking single entry with 25 entrants, that's different than single entry with 2,000. But most likely for me, I haven't built single entry lineups, but most likely I would just have like anybody that isn't the Diamondbacks. You could go to one of the negative, the high leverage teams, but I probably would rather go to like a higher upside team or a team that's more likely to succeed. Maybe Philadelphia. Kansas City, I think, is probably on the short list for me. They do have one of the higher implied run totals outside of Diamondbacks. So, I think either of them are fine. It is a good matchup for the Cubs also against Joey Estes. I think I would probably get to KC first, but the Cubs are also a perfectly fine team. What you could also see happen with the Cubs, because the Cubs are going to be one of the more popular teams other than the Diamondbacks, what you could see happen in single entry and small field is that Arizona's ownership actually goes up, which causes the Cubs to come down a little bit. So you actually get an even bigger potential payoff or benefit for going to the second best team, basically. That could happen. Or you could just see Cubs ownership go up, Diamondbacks ownership go up, and everybody else just end up really, really low. One of those two things pretty likely to happen. But either one, the Cubs or the Royals look fine. I think the Cubs probably succeed a little bit more often, but Kansas City probably comes in at a little bit less ownership. If there's any other questions, get them in now. Feel free to throw those in. But I will recap the pitching portion. Ken said he missed it. I am really, really concentrated at pitcher, and that's in part because I'm so spread out with offenses. Kelly looks fine. I'm not getting to him. He's projected for 10 to 15% ownership. He's in Coors Field. That's the negative. The positive is he's facing the Rockies. If I were playing a lot of more expensive hitters, I'd probably have more Kelly, but I am getting to pretty cheap stacks most of the time, and I'm not really having trouble getting to good hitters where I need them, expensive hitters rather, where I need them. So I'm pretty concentrated on Detmers, Imanaga, Skeens, and then to a lesser extent, I'm getting to Mania, just less than the field. But Kelly is certainly somebody I think is a perfectly fine play, even though I don't really have him. Same can be said for Seth Lugo. I think, the matchup here against the Tigers is fine. I'm just preferring getting more Detmers, Imanaga, Skeens. So that's kind of a preference thing, for lack of a better word. I do think that they're good plays. I just don't really have them. TTID Forever said, is San Diego going under-owned as a stack? I don't have the top stack stuff in front of me, so I don't know if under-owned is the right word. They are probably pretty correctly owned, just based on how I'm getting to Tatis, Machado, maybe a little under-owned. I'm a little bit over on Tatis. I'm a little over on Machado. I'm not really getting to a lot of San Diego elsewhere, though. Donovan Solano was showing up like 5% for me. I think, 5-6%. I think they're fine. Like, they're very, very similar to other teams on the slate in terms of their chances of success. I think they're pretty similar in terms of ownership. I don't know that I would say under-owned. I would say that I don't think their ownership is a problem. Like, I'm not avoiding San Diego because of their ownership. I think the only team on the slate that's happening for me is Arizona. Steven said Paris Campbell elevated by the Eagles. Not sure if there's been Johnny Wilson news yet, but that is important. Also, if there hasn't been Johnny Wilson news, one, that is probably a bad sign for Johnny Wilson. And two, you want Johnny Wilson news. Paris Campbell very easily could end up being the slot receiver there. Neil and I talked about that a lot this morning. I'm sure he will talk about it more on his show tonight. But yeah, Paris Campbell, $200 on DraftKings is definitely interesting. Jack said one entry in the 111, avoid Arizona as a primary. I probably will be. They weren't, when I ran some initial stuff earlier, testing some stuff out, they weren't one of the teams that I was getting to in that. Keep in mind, like, you can pick any team on the slate, pretty much any player on the slate, and there's going to be lineups that you can play that expect that you project or that expect to make you money. With a team like Arizona that's really popular, it's just that there's more lineups of all these other teams that I can choose from than Arizona. You can find ways to make a good Arizona lineup. So, if you're looking at it and saying, I really love Arizona, like, I think that the ownership is correct or lower than it should be, you can still make good Arizona lineups. You just want to be going along with them to low-owned pitching, low-owned secondary stacks. But speaking for myself, I would assume that Arizona is not one of the first teams I'm playing in the 111. Chunk Dadu said Bart or Grandal. They're pretty much the same play. The park isn't good for any of them. The matchup isn't great. Bart has the better lineup spot, but he's more expensive. Grandal's batting sixth. He's less expensive. Grandal has less pinch hit risk since he's a switch hitter. Not that I think Bart has a ton, like he's starting against a righty. Whichever one fits. Like, if you have the salary, I'd probably play Bart, but I can check my projection. I think they are pretty much the same play, though. Yeah, Bart, 6.6 DraftKings points for me. Did not have Grandal projected in. Didn't have that lineup. So I don't know where Grandal is, but I would assume he's at like 6 or something. They are pretty much the same thing. So just whatever fits into your lineup. If there are no other questions, though, thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to subscribe to Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, all of that stuff. Be back here talking baseball again tomorrow. Good luck on your baseball lineups tonight. Good luck on Showdown. Hopefully, you all make some money, and I will see you back here tomorrow.